Four doctors told Eleanor Lindgren she could never have children. Her body was too wrong, too broken, too big. Then the impossible happened. She got pregnant. The doctor gave her 50-50 odds. She died on that delivery table. Her heart stopped. Everyone in the room thought it was over. But Eleanor Lindgren was not done fighting. This is her story. The words came out flat, rehearsed, stripped of everything but truth. My body's too big. I'm not breeding material. Eleanor Lindgren stood in the parlor of a Montana ranch house, dust motes floating in the late afternoon light, like tiny witnesses to her confession. Her hands, rough from years of labor, held a sheaf of papers, medical documents, 4 different doctors' opinions from Sweden, all translated into careful English, all saying the same thing. Across from her stood James McAllister, a man she had met exactly 3 times. Once at the train station when he collected her like cargo. Once at the general store when he introduced her to a town that stared at her like she was a circus attraction. And now here on what was supposed to be their wedding day. She watched him read the documents, watched his weathered face for the familiar look, the one that said damaged goods, the one she had seen 100 times before in 100 different faces in 2 different countries. But his expression did not change. He read methodically, turned each page with calloused fingers, set them down on the table between them. I need you to understand what you're getting, Eleanor continued, her Swedish accent still thick, despite 2 years of practicing English in boarding houses and on steamships and in the cramped quarters of immigrant trains. I can work, I can partner with you on this land, but I cannot give you children. If that is what you need, find another wife. There are other women on the bride lists, women who are whole. James McAllister looked at her then, really looked. And Eleanor braced herself for rejection, the way she had learned to brace herself, with her spine straight and her chin lifted and her heart locked away in a place where words could not reach it. She was tall enough to look him in the eye, which had always unnerved men. Her shoulders were broad, built by years of farm work that should have belonged to brothers she never had. Her hands were calloused, her figure nothing like the delicate creatures in the fashion plates that decorated shop windows. She was, as Lars Anderson had so memorably announced to an entire Swedish congregation, more ox than woman. But James McAllister did not flinch, did not look away, did not scan her body with that calculating assessment she had come to expect from men deciding if she was worth the investment of their name and their home and their future. I don't need children, he said quietly. His voice was rough like gravel shifting under boot heels. I need help running this ranch. The land is good, but it's more than one person can handle. I need a partner. Someone strong enough for the work, smart enough to learn it, willing to stay. He paused and something shifted in his green eyes. Something that looked almost like pain, quickly buried. Can you do that? Eleanor felt something crack inside her. A tiny fissure in the armor she had spent 28 years building brick by brick, rejection by rejection. This was not the answer she expected. Men always wanted heirs, always. It was the first thing they asked about the primary purpose of a wife, the reason mail-order bride advertisements existed in the first place. Yes, she heard herself say, I can do that. Then that's enough. They were married that afternoon by Reverend Thomas Whitmore, in a small ceremony attended by no one except the Reverend's wife and a ranch hand named Samuel, who served as witness. Eleanor noticed the minister's cold eyes following her throughout the brief exchange of vows. She noticed the way his lip curled slightly when he pronounced them man and wife. She noticed, but she did not understand yet. There would be time for understanding later. There would be time for everything later. The memory came to Eleanor that night as she lay in the narrow bed of the room that was now hers. Not the marriage bed, James had been clear about that. Separate rooms, a business arrangement, partners not intimates. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt the past pressing against her like a weight on her chest, dragging her back across an ocean and 10 years to a small Swedish church where everything she was had been declared worthless in front of everyone she knew. Sweden, 1888, 10 years before. Eleanor Lindgren stood at the altar in her mother's wedding dress, let out as far as the seams would allow, still straining across her shoulders like a promise the fabric could not keep. The church was full. The entire village had come to see the Lindgren girl finally get married. She was 18 years old and she had already learned that her body was a problem to be solved. Lars Anderson stood at the altar, handsome in his Sunday suit, his blonde hair pomaded into submission. He had been courting Eleanor for 6 months, ever since her father made it clear that her dowry would include the family's best breeding bull. Lars's family needed that bull. Their herd was struggling, and Lars needed a wife who could work, who could bear the labor of a farm that was bleeding money. Eleanor had not loved him, but she had allowed herself to hope. Hope that someone might look past her height, her breadth, her wrongness, and see something worth keeping. The priest asked if anyone objected to this union. Lars Anderson raised his hand. The church went silent. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face, felt her hands go cold inside of her mother's. Borrowed gloves, felt the world tilt on its axis and begin to spin in a direction she could not follow. "I cannot marry this woman." Lars's voice carried to every corner of the chapel, bounced off the whitewashed walls, echoed in the rafters, where generations of Lindgrens had heard their wedding vows pronounced. I thought I could overlook her deficiencies. But standing here now, looking at her, I realize I cannot spend my life waking up next to something more ox than woman. The gasps came like a wave through the congregation. The whispers followed sharp and sibilant. She saw Lars's mother nodding approvingly from the third pew. She saw her father staring at the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. She saw the pitying glances of women who had always known this would happen, who had always said the Lindgren girl was too much, too big, too wrong. Eleanor did not cry, did not scream, did not run. She stood perfectly still as Lars walked down the aisle and out of the church, his footsteps echoing in the silence. She stood there as the congregation filed out, muttering amongst themselves, some sympathetic, most simply satisfied that their suspicions had been confirmed. She stood there as the priest quietly removed himself, as her father left without a word, as her younger brother Eric watched her with 12-year-old eyes that did not understand but somehow knew that something had broken that could never be fixed. Only when the church was empty did Eleanor sit down in the front pew, still wearing her mother's dress, and stare at the crucifix above the altar. "Why?" she whispered to the carved figure of Christ. "Why did you make me wrong?" There was no answer. There never was. The years that followed carved themselves into Eleanor's memory, like wounds that refused to heal. At 19, her mother died giving birth to a stillborn baby. The doctor said her body gave out. Said some women were not made for bearing children. Said it was a mercy, really, that the baby did not survive to inherit its mother's weakness. Eleanor inherited something else: responsibility. Her father began drinking the day of the funeral and did not stop. Someone had to run the household. Someone had to raise her 12-year-old brother Eric. Someone had to keep food on the table and clothes on their backs and the farm from falling into complete ruin. That someone was Eleanor. At 21, she visited doctors about her irregular cycles. The diagnosis came wrapped in clinical language that barely disguised its cruelty: hormonal abnormalities, pelvic structure inconsistent with successful childbearing, conception unlikely, pregnancy, should it somehow occur, extremely dangerous. Perhaps for the best, the doctor had said, not unkindly, given your build. At 23, her father died. He had drunk himself into the grave the way he had drunk himself through the last 4 years, and he left behind nothing but debts. The farm was sold. The breeding bull that should have been Eleanor's dowry went to pay creditors. She and Eric moved into a boarding house in Stockholm, where Eleanor worked as a laundress, scrubbing other people's linens until her hands cracked and bled. Her hands grew rough. Her back grew strong. Her heart grew harder. At 25, Eric announced he was emigrating to America. He was 19 years old and full of dreams about railroads and gold and a country where a man could make something of himself regardless of where he came from. Eleanor begged him not to leave her alone. She had given up everything for him, had raised him when their father could not, had worked herself to exhaustion to keep him fed and clothed and educated. He went anyway. She received 2 letters from him in the first year. He was working on a railroad in California. The work was hard, but the pay was good. He would send for her soon. Then nothing. No letters, no word. She did not know if he was alive or dead. She only knew that she was alone, truly alone, in a way she had never been before. At 26, Eleanor saw an advertisement in a newspaper. American ranchers seek capable wives. Passage paid, good homes guaranteed. She wrote her letter that night by candlelight in a boarding house room that smelled like lye soap and loneliness. She had nothing left to lose. Montana, 1898. Present day. James McAllister stood at the window of his bedroom, watching Eleanor cross the yard in the early morning light. She moved like someone who knew how to work. Efficient, purposeful, wasting nothing. In 2 weeks of marriage, she had already transformed the henhouse from a disaster into something functional. She had reorganized the root cellar so that he could actually find things. She had fixed a fence in the east pasture that he had been meaning to repair for months, but somehow never got around to. She was nothing like Sarah. The thought came unbidden, and with it the familiar wave of guilt that crashed over him every time he allowed himself to remember. He turned away from the window, and his eyes fell on the daguerreotype on his dresser. Sarah on their wedding day. Delicate, smiling. Her dark hair perfectly curled, her white dress pristine, her face full of a hope that he had failed to protect. "I'm sorry," James whispered. It was what he said every morning, every night, every time he passed the portrait or looked at her grave on the hill behind the house or remembered the sound of her voice calling his name. It was never enough. 5 years earlier, James McAllister married Sarah Whitmore when he was 27 years old and so full of hope that he thought his heart might burst from the weight of it. She was the minister's sister, delicate and pretty, and everything a wife was supposed to be. She laughed like music and smiled like sunshine and made him feel like the luckiest man in Montana. The first year was happy, the second year was harder. Sarah struggled with the isolation of ranch life in a way that James had not anticipated. She was a town girl raised on Sunday suppers and ladies' auxiliary meetings and neighbors within shouting distance. The ranch was 10 miles from town. Some days she did not see another soul besides James and the ranch hands. "I'm lonely," she told him again and again. "This land is so empty. I feel like I'm disappearing into it." James tried to help. He brought her books from town. He encouraged her to visit her brother more often. He told himself that she would adjust, that all new brides had difficult periods, that love would be enough to bridge the gap between what she needed and what he could give. Then Sarah announced she was pregnant and everything changed. James was overjoyed. A child would give Sarah purpose. A child would fill the empty house with noise and laughter and life. A child would fix everything that was broken between them. But Sarah was not overjoyed. Sarah was terrified. "Something doesn't feel right," she told him in her 5th month. "The baby is too quiet. I'm bleeding sometimes. Please, James, I need to see the doctor." But there was a cattle drive scheduled, the biggest sale of the year. The ranch was struggling financially, and they needed this drive to go well. James could not afford to miss it. "It's probably nothing," he told her, kissing her forehead, already thinking about the logistics of moving 300 head of cattle across 40 miles of rough terrain. "First pregnancies are always difficult. My mother told me so. I'll be back in a week. Send Sam for the doctor if anything changes." Sarah grabbed his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong for such a delicate woman. "Please," she said, "I have a feeling. Something is wrong. Please don't leave me." James looked into her frightened eyes, and for a moment he hesitated. For a moment he considered staying. For a moment he put his wife ahead of his cattle and his profits and his plans. But only for a moment. "I'll be back soon," he said, and he kissed her goodbye and he rode out into the morning with the taste of her fear still on his lips. He was 2 days into the drive when Sam caught up with him, riding a horse lathered and wild-eyed with exertion. "You have to come back, boss." The young man's voice cracked with panic. "The baby's coming early. There's so much blood. The doctor came as fast as he could, but he doesn't know if he can save her. You have to come now." James rode through the night, rode until his horse nearly collapsed beneath him, rode until his muscles screamed and his eyes burned and his lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. He arrived home as the sun was rising. The house was too quiet. He found Sarah in their bed, pale as the sheets she lay upon, her dark hair spread across the pillow like a halo. The doctor stood beside her, his hands stained with blood, his face gray with exhaustion and failure. "I'm sorry," the doctor said. "We tried everything, but the placenta had separated. She lost too much blood. By the time I got here, it was already too late." James looked at his wife, at her closed eyes and still chest, and the peaceful expression on her face that seemed to mock him with its serenity. "And the baby," he heard himself ask. "A boy. He didn't survive either." The doctor showed him the tiny body wrapped in a blanket, perfect features, 10 fingers, 10 toes. A son who never drew breath because his father chose cattle over his mother's fear. James buried Sarah and his unnamed son on the hill behind the house, in a spot that overlooked the valley she had tried so hard to love. He stood at the graves until the sun went down, and then he kept standing there in the dark waiting for something that would never come. The doctor's words echoed in the empty air. If we had caught it earlier, if someone had sent for me sooner. If James had stayed, if James had listened, if James had chosen differently. He made a vow that night, standing over the fresh, turned earth that held everything he had ever loved. He swore that he would never put another woman at risk, never again let his needs come before someone else's safety, never again be the reason someone died. It was a vow he would break in the worst possible way. The partnership between Eleanor and James settled into a rhythm over the following weeks. They worked side by side during the days and retreated to separate silences at night. It was not intimacy, but it was something. Something that felt to Eleanor almost like respect. She noticed the way James watched her sometimes. Not with the calculating assessment she had come to expect from men, but with something closer to wonder. As if he could not quite believe that she existed. As if her competence was a gift he had not expected to receive. The first week she discovered that he had not been eating properly. The kitchen bore the evidence of bachelor neglect, moldy bread, rancid butter, a larder full of supplies that had sat untouched for months. She took over the cooking without asking permission, producing hearty Swedish meals that reminded her of home. Thick stews and fresh bread and pickled vegetables that made the ranch house smell like something other than dust and loneliness. James said nothing about the change, but she noticed that he started coming in from the fields earlier, started lingering at the table after meals were finished, started looking at her with something in his eyes that might have been gratitude. The second week, a fence in the north pasture collapsed under the weight of a fallen tree. Eleanor helped James repair it, working alongside him with an efficiency that clearly surprised him. "You know what you're doing," he said, watching her drive a nail with practiced precision. "I grew up on a farm," she replied, not pausing in her work. "You think I was just decoration?" She saw him smile then, the first real smile she had seen from him, quick and startled like a wild animal that had forgotten it knew how to play. The third week, James's mother came to visit. Catherine McAllister was a small woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. She inspected Eleanor the way one might inspect livestock at auction, taking in her height, her broad shoulders, her work-roughened hands, with an expression of barely concealed disapproval. "So," Catherine said, settling into a chair in the parlor, as if she owned it, which Eleanor supposed she once had. "You're the mail-order bride." "I am. From Sweden, James tells me." "Yes. And what did you do in Sweden that you had to come all this way to find a husband?" Eleanor felt the familiar anger rising in her chest, the defensive rage that had become her constant companion. But something in James' face stopped her. A flicker of embarrassment, a silent plea for patience. "I worked," Eleanor said flatly. "I raised my brother after our mother died. I ran a household after our father couldn't. I survived." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "And is that what you intend to do here? Survive?" "I intend to be useful. Beyond that, I expect nothing." The older woman was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to James, dismissing Eleanor as if she had ceased to exist. "She's not Sarah." "No," James said quietly. "She's not." That night, after Catherine had returned to her own property, Eleanor sat on the porch staring at nothing. The stars were bright and cold above her, indifferent witnesses to her displacement. James came to stand beside her. He did not sit, did not touch her, just stood there, a solid presence in the darkness. "She was the same with Sarah," he said finally. "My mother, it's not you." It was the first time he had mentioned his dead wife by name, the first time he had offered anything resembling explanation or comfort. Eleanor did not know what to say, so she said nothing. But something shifted between them in that silence. Some wall grew a little lower. Some distance grew a little shorter. The fourth week, Eleanor attended church for the first time. The whispers followed her down the aisle like faithful dogs. Too tall, too mannish. "That's the mail-order bride. Did you see the size of her hands? What kind of woman is that?" Reverend Whitmore's sermon seemed pointed. He spoke of the proper place of wives, of submission and domesticity, and the sacred duty of bearing children. His cold eyes found Eleanor in the congregation again and again, and she understood then that his hostility at the wedding had not been her imagination. She sat through the service with her spine rigid and her face expressionless, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her wounded. Afterwards, only one woman approached her. Margaret O'Brien was perhaps 45, with fiery red hair, going gray at the temples, and an Irish accent thick as butter. She ran a boarding house in Billings, 40 miles away, and had come to town to sell eggs and gossip in equal measure. "Don't mind them," Maggie said, pressing a hand briefly to Eleanor's arm. "Small minds, smaller hearts. They've got nothing better to do than tear down anyone who doesn't fit their narrow little boxes." Eleanor looked at this stranger who had offered kindness where none was expected. "Thank you. Come visit me in Billings sometime if you get the chance. I'll make you proper tea, the kind that reminds you there's good in the world yet." It was a small thing, a few words from a stranger, but Eleanor held on to it the way a drowning woman holds on to driftwood. Someone had seen her as worthy of kindness. Someone had looked past her wrong body and her foreign accent and her mail-order origins and seen something worth acknowledging. The fifth week, a spring storm damaged the barn roof. Eleanor climbed up to help with repairs, working beside James and Sam for 2 full days, while rain threatened on the horizon and time worked against them. By the end, she was exhausted in a way that felt almost holy. Her muscles burned, her hands were raw, but the roof was fixed and the horses were safe, and James was looking at her with an expression she had never seen directed at her before. "You're stronger than any woman I've ever met," he said. She waited for the qualifier. The but that always followed such statements. "But you're too strong. But it's not feminine. But no man wants a wife who can outwork him." The qualifier never came. The 6th week, Eleanor realized with something like wonder that she was happy. Not deliriously happy, not foolishly happy, but content, safe, valued for what she could do rather than judged for what she could not be. She wrote a letter to her brother Eric at his last known address in California, not knowing if it would reach him, not knowing if he was alive to receive it. "I think I've found a home," she wrote, "a real home, the kind I never thought I'd have. He doesn't look at me like I'm broken. He treats me like a partner, like I matter. I don't know if this is love, and I don't know if I'm capable of love anymore after everything, but it's something. It's enough." She sealed the letter and sent it into the unknown, a message in a bottle cast upon an ocean of uncertainty. And for 2 months, everything was good. The night that changed everything came without warning. Eleanor woke to the sound of glass breaking. She lay in the darkness of her room, listening, trying to identify the source of the noise. Then she heard something else. A voice, low and rough and broken. She found James in the parlor, whiskey bottle in hand, staring at Sarah's portrait above the fireplace. The broken glass was from a lamp he had knocked over. The broken sound was coming from his throat. She had never seen him drink more than a single glass at supper. She had never seen him look at the portrait for more than a passing moment. But tonight he stood before it as if hypnotized, swaying slightly, his face wet with tears. "James." He did not turn around. "Go back to bed, Eleanor." She should have listened, should have retreated to her room and pretended this was not happening. Their arrangement was clear. Partners, not intimates. She owed him nothing beyond the work she performed. But something in his voice stopped her. The naked grief, the raw self-hatred. She recognized it because she carried her own version of it deep in the places she never let anyone see. "What day is it?" she asked, though she was beginning to understand. "The day I killed her." His voice was barely a whisper. 5 years ago today, I killed her and my son because I thought cattle were more important than her fear." He drank from the bottle. Whiskey ran down his chin, and he did not bother to wipe it away. Eleanor crossed the parlor and sat down in the chair across from him. "Tell me." "You don't want to know." "Tell me anyway." So he did. He told her about Sarah, how they had met when he was young and full of hope, how she had laughed like music and smiled like sunshine, and made him believe he could be happy, how she had struggled with the isolation of ranch life, how she had begged him not to go on the cattle drive. He told her about the pregnancy, how afraid Sarah had been, how she had known something was wrong, how she had grabbed his hand and pleaded with him to stay. She knew, he said, his words slurring together. She knew something was wrong, and I told her she was being dramatic. I chose money over her life. I chose cattle over my wife. And she died because of it. She died alone screaming for me, and I was 40 miles away counting heads and calculating profits. Eleanor did not know what to say. What could anyone say to grief, this deep guilt, this heavy, "You didn't know," she tried. "You couldn't have known it would happen like that." I knew she was scared. He looked at her then and his eyes were terrible, red-rimmed and raw and full of a pain that had been festering for 5 years without release. I knew she was scared, and I left anyway. I put my needs above her safety, and she died. The clock on the mantel struck midnight. The fire had burned down to embers. The portrait of Sarah watched them both with painted eyes that seemed to hold their own kind of accusation. "I don't want to be alone tonight," James said. His voice was barely audible. "Please, I can't be alone with the memories, just tonight. I just need someone to remind me I'm still alive." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct told her this was a mistake. Their arrangement was clear. This was not what she had agreed to. But he looked so broken, and she had been alone for so long. And he was the first person in years who had looked at her body without disgust or pity or calculating assessment. "It doesn't matter anyway," she heard herself say. "You read the documents. You saw what the doctors wrote. 4 different doctors, James, 4 different opinions, all saying the same thing. It's not possible for me to conceive. My body doesn't work that way." He reached for her hand. His fingers were rough and calloused and trembling. "Just tonight," he whispered. "Just don't leave me alone with her ghost." She did not leave. In the morning, he was gone to the fields before she woke. Neither of them spoke of what had happened. The arrangement continued as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. And 3 months later, the impossible announced itself in ways that could not be ignored. Eleanor knew before she admitted it to herself. The missed cycles she dismissed at first. Her body had never worked right anyway. Irregular was her normal. The nausea she attributed to a stomach bug, to bad food, to the stress of adapting to a new life in a new country on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. The exhaustion she blamed on hard work. The tenderness in her breast she tried not to think about at all. But when her body began to change in ways that could not be explained away, when the flatness of her stomach gave way to a curve that grew more pronounced each week, when the impossible flutter of movement began deep inside her, she could no longer pretend. She was carrying James McAllister's child, the child that 4 Swedish doctors had sworn she could never conceive. The child that her wrong body, her broken body, her too big and too masculine, and not built for this body had somehow created against every medical certainty. She told him in the yard under the hard Montana sun because she could not bear to tell him in the house where she had begun to feel at home. The dust devils spun around them as she spoke, her voice flat and controlled, each word placed with surgical precision. "I'm pregnant." James's face went white. White as bone. White as snow. White as the sheets Sarah had died on 5 years ago in this same house. "That's not possible." The doctor said, "Unlikely. Not impossible. There's a difference, James." She watched him struggle to process what she was saying. Watch the denial flicker across his face, followed by fear, followed by the slow, terrible dawn of understanding. And something inside Eleanor, something she had been holding back for weeks, finally snapped. The rage came out of nowhere and everywhere at once. "You knew." Each word fell like a hammer blow. Each syllable carried the weight of 28 years of being told she was wrong. "You knew the doctors said unlikely, not impossible. You knew there was a chance, however small, and you took it anyway because you needed comfort, and I was convenient." "Eleanor, I swear I didn't think—" "No," she cut him off, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "You didn't think. That's exactly the problem." She stepped closer to him, using every inch of her height. For the first time in her life, she weaponized her size, deliberately making him feel small, the way she had been made to feel small her entire existence. "You gambled with my body, my life, and now I'm the one who has to survive what you were so sure couldn't happen." James's hat twisted in his hands like he was wringing out a wet rag. His face had gone gray. The sun beat down on them both, harsh and unforgiving, and illuminating every flaw, every crack, every wound. "I didn't gamble," he said weakly. "I believed the doctors, just like you did." The difference is that I wasn't the one who pushed for it. Eleanor's voice shook now, rage and fear braiding together into something she could barely control. You came to my room, you convinced me it was safe. You used my own medical condition to justify taking what you wanted in your moment of weakness. She saw him open his mouth, close it, open it again. I thought we both wanted. What I wanted was to keep our agreement. Her hand moved to her belly to the swell that had become impossible to hide beneath her loose dresses. What I wanted was to feel safe for the first time in my life. Do you have any idea what it's been like, James? To be told your whole life that your body is wrong, too big, too masculine, not made for the things women's bodies are supposed to do. She was not crying, would not give him the satisfaction, but her voice shook anyway, betraying the terror that lived beneath the anger. I came to America because in Sweden I had nothing. No family, no prospects, just doctors telling me I was defective and men telling me I wasn't woman enough. And then you offered me something different. Partnership, respect, safety. You still have that? I don't. The words exploded out of her with a force that made James step backward. I don't have safety anymore. Do you understand what this pregnancy means for someone with my body? The doctors said conception was unlikely because my hips are too narrow. My hormones are wrong. My entire system isn't designed for this. Her breathing came faster now. The fear she had been suppressing for weeks came crashing through the walls of her anger. If I'm lucky, the baby will be small enough that I might survive the delivery. If I'm not lucky, I die, the same way your first wife died. And you'll bury me on that hill next to her and tell yourself it wasn't your fault because the doctors said it probably wouldn't happen. James made a sound like something was breaking inside him. Don't say that. Don't even think that. Why not? It's the truth, isn't it? Eleanor laughed, and the sound that came out was bitter and broken, scraping against the hot Montana air. You took a calculated risk with my life, and now we both have to live with the consequences. Except if things go wrong, only one of us actually dies. The silence that fell between them was absolute. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, indifferent to the human tragedy unfolding below. Cattle lowed in the distance. The ranch continued its daily rhythms, the land and the animals, and the endless work that cared nothing for guilt or grief or fear. I'm sorry. James's voice came barely above a whisper. God, Eleanor. I'm so sorry. You're right about all of it. I told myself it was safe because I wanted to believe it was safe, because I needed comfort, and I convinced myself that unlikely meant impossible. I heard what I wanted to hear. Yes, you did. And now you're paying for my selfishness. Yes, I am. He looked up at her then, and she saw something in his eyes she had not expected. Not just guilt, not just fear, something deeper, something that looked like genuine horror at what he had done. What do you need from me? He asked. Right now. What do you need? The question caught her off guard. She had expected excuses, deflection, maybe anger thrown back at her for not being more careful herself. Not this quiet surrender to her fury, not this acknowledgement of his fault. I need you to stop pretending this is something that just happened to us, she said finally. This is something you made happen, and I need you to own that. I own it. His voice was steady now, clear, the voice of a man facing a verdict he knew he deserved. This is my fault, my choice, my failure to think beyond what I wanted in that moment. And whatever happens, whatever you need from this point forward, I'm here. Not because I can make it right, I can't make this right, but because you shouldn't have to face this alone. Eleanor wanted to stay angry, wanted the rage to keep burning hot enough to protect her from the terror underneath. But something in his words and the way he stood there accepting her fury without defending himself made a crack in her armor. I'm terrified, she whispered. Every day I'm more terrified. My body is doing something it was never supposed to be able to do, and I don't know if it can finish what it started. I know. Do you really know what it's like to feel your body changing in ways that might kill you? To feel something growing inside you that might be the last thing you ever feel? James shook his head slowly. No, I don't know what that's like, but I watched Sarah go through it, watched her get more scared every day, watched her know something was wrong and not be able to stop it. His voice broke on the name of his dead wife. And I swore I'd never put another woman through that. Never again. And then I did it anyway. I did exactly what I swore I'd never do. The admission hung in the hot Montana air between them, heavy as the dust, inescapable as the truth. "So what now?" Eleanor asked. "You feel guilty. I feel terrified, and we both pretend that's enough." No, James met her eyes directly, and something had changed in his face. The grief was still there. The guilt was still there. But underneath it, she saw something else. Determination. Purpose. A man deciding to be better than his worst moment. "Now I do everything I can to keep you alive. I take you to every doctor within 100 miles. I find out what we're dealing with and how to survive it. I don't leave your sparte. I don't let you work yourself to exhaustion. I don't let you face this alone. That doesn't fix what you did. No, it doesn't. Nothing fixes what I did, but it's what I'm offering anyway." Eleanor studied his face, looked for deception, for manipulation, for the signs she had learned to read in men who said one thing and meant another. She had become an expert at detecting false promises and empty words. She had been betrayed too many times to trust easily. But she did not find the familiar markers of dishonesty. What she found instead was something that might have been genuine remorse, genuine fear, genuine determination to do better even though better would never be enough. "The nearest doctor who might know anything about difficult pregnancies is in Billings," she said slowly. 3 days ride. "Then we leave tomorrow. The ranch can wait." "You can't." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she could keep working, keep pretending everything was fine. But the truth was she was exhausted. The pregnancy was taking more out of her than she had expected, and the fear was eating her alive from the inside. "Okay," she said finally. "Tomorrow." James nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. "Eleanor." "What?" "I know sorry doesn't mean anything right now, but I am sorrier than I've ever been for anything in my life." She did not respond, just watched him walk back toward the barn, his shoulders carrying the weight of what he had done. And Eleanor stood alone in the dust, one hand on her belly, feeling the impossible life moving inside her, wondering if sorry would matter at all if she did not survive to hear him say it again. That night, Eleanor lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling. Her hand rested on her stomach on the curve that grew more pronounced each day. Inside her, the baby moved. Small flutters, tiny kicks. Life insisting on itself despite every medical opinion that said it should not exist. She thought about her mother who had died giving birth to a baby that never breathed. She thought about Sarah McAllister, who had died in this very house screaming for a husband who was not there. She thought about all the doctors who had examined her body and declared it wrong, deficient, not made for the purpose women's bodies were supposed to serve. And she thought about the child growing inside her. The impossible child. The child who had beaten odds that should have been insurmountable. "I don't know if I'll survive you," she whispered to the darkness, to the life within her, to whatever force had decided to make the impossible real. "But if I do, I swear to you, I will never let anyone tell you that you are wrong. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. You exist because my body did something it wasn't supposed to be able to do. You are a miracle, little one. Whatever happens next, remember that. You are a miracle." The baby kicked against her palm as if in response. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to find sleep. Tomorrow they would ride for Billings. Tomorrow they would learn what odds they faced. Tomorrow everything would change again. But for now, in the darkness of a Montana night, she allowed herself one small moment of hope. She had survived everything else the world had thrown at her. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this too. The road to Billings stretched out before them like a sentence waiting to be completed. 3 days of hard riding through country that did not care whether they lived or died. 3 days of dust and sun in the endless rhythm of hooves against earth. 3 days of Eleanor's changing body protesting every mile. James had wanted to take the wagon. It would have been easier on her, gentler, more appropriate for a woman in her condition. But the wagon would have added 2 more days to the journey. 2 more days of not knowing. 2 more days of fear eating her alive from the inside. So they rode. And every jostle, every bump, every moment in the saddle was a reminder of what her body was doing, what it might not survive doing. The first day passed in a blur of discomfort and silence. Eleanor focused on the mechanics of riding. Keep your weight centered. Move with the horse, not against it. Breathe through the nausea that rose every time the terrain grew rough. Do not think about what waits at the end of this journey. Do not think about the numbers the doctor might speak. Do not think about dying. James rode beside her close enough to catch her if she fell, far enough to give her space. He watched her constantly. She knew even when she was not looking. She could feel his eyes on her like a physical weight, heavy with guilt and fear, and something else she did not want to name. They stopped at noon beside a creek that cut through the dry landscape like a scar. Eleanor dismounted carefully, her legs trembling from the effort of staying upright. The nausea that had plagued her for weeks was worse now, amplified by the motion of the ride and the heat of the sun and the terror that lived in her stomach alongside the impossible child. James held out dried beef and bread. You need to eat something. I need to not vomit for 5 minutes. She sat heavily in the shade of a scrub oak, breathing through her mouth, willing her body to cooperate. That would be nice. He crouched beside her, not touching, just present. She had noticed that about him since the confrontation. He was careful now, maintaining distance, never assuming permission. The guilt was written in every careful inch of space between them. The doctor in Billings, he said quietly. Dr. Harrison, I sent a telegram before we left. He delivered difficult babies during the war, saw things most doctors never see, saved women that other physicians had given up on. And if he can't help me, the question hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Then we find someone who can. But his voice lacked conviction, and they both heard it. They both knew the truth that neither wanted to speak aloud. There were not many doctors who understood bodies like Eleanor's, bodies that broke the rules, bodies that did impossible things and then demanded the impossible price for doing them. Night fell hard and cold across the Montana landscape. They made camp near a different creek, this one wider and slower, its water catching the last light of sunset like liquid gold. James built a fire while Eleanor sat wrapped in a blanket, watching flames dance against the gathering darkness. She could feel the baby moving now. Small flutters that should not have been possible. Life insisting on itself despite every medical opinion that had declared it could not exist. She placed her hand on her belly and felt a tiny kick against her palm, as if the child was announcing its presence, demanding to be acknowledged. Can I ask you something? James's voice came quiet through the darkness. He sat on the opposite side of the fire, his face half lit by the flames, the other half lost in shadow. You can ask. Do you hate me? Eleanor was silent for a long moment. The fire crackled. The creek whispered over stones. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the night, hunting for prey that could not see it coming. I don't know, she said finally. I want to hate you. It would be easier if I could just hate you and be done with it. Hate is simple. Hate is clean. You draw a line and everything on one side is enemy and everything on the other side is safe. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. But I keep remembering the 2 months before. How you treated me like a partner. Like I mattered beyond what I could do for you. How you never made me feel too big or too much or wrong. She stared into the fire, watching the flames consume the wood, transform it into ash and heat in light. And then I remember that night, how you used the very thing that made me vulnerable, my own medical condition, to justify taking what you wanted. And I don't know which version of you is real. I don't know which version to believe. Both. James's voice was heavy with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. That's the hell of it, Eleanor. Both versions are real. I did respect you. I do respect you. More than I've respected anyone in a long time. And I also used you. Failed you. Put my needs above your safety because I was drowning in grief and you were there, and I convinced myself that the doctor's unlikely meant impossible. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. People aren't just one thing. We're capable of being decent and being selfish sometimes in the same breath, sometimes in the same moment. That doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing excuses what I did, but it's the truth. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. It's just honest. Eleanor lay down on her bedroll, staring up at the stars scattered across the enormous Montana sky. So many of them. Countless points of light, each one a sun, each one burning in the void, indifferent to the small dramas of human beings on a small planet spinning through the darkness. If I die, she said, I need you to promise me something. Don't. Don't talk like that. Promise me. Her voice was steel now, the voice of a woman who had learned that hope was a luxury she could not always afford. If I die and the baby lives, you don't raise that child with guilt. You don't make them carry the weight of what happened between us. You don't tell them their mother died because their father made a mistake. You let them just be. You let them be innocent of all of this. James's voice came thick with emotion, rough with tears he was trying not to shed. You're not going to die. You don't know that. I know I won't let it happen. I'll tear the world apart before I let you die because of what I did. You might not have a choice. The words hung in the air between them, heavy as the stars, cold as the night. Neither of them slept well. The second day was worse. Eleanor's back ached from riding a deep pain that radiated from her spine through her hips and down her legs. Every movement of the horse sent jolts of discomfort through her body. The baby pressed against organs that had nowhere to go, crowding her lungs, making every breath a conscious effort. Her body was running out of room for the impossible thing growing inside it. James watched her with increasing worry, his face a map of guilt and fear. We can stop. Rest for a day. The doctor will still be there tomorrow. No. Eleanor gritted her teeth against another wave of pain. We're almost there. I can make it. But she was not sure she could. Every mile felt like it might be her last. Every breath was a struggle against the weight of her own body. She was waging war against herself, trying to nurture life while simultaneously being destroyed by it. The landscape rolled past them, endless and indifferent. Brown hills and blue sky and the occasional flash of green where water touched the earth, beautiful in its harsh way, unforgiving in the way all beautiful things eventually proved to be. They reached Billings at sunset on the third day. The town was bigger than Eleanor had expected. Real buildings lined real streets, 2 and 3 stories tall, made of brick and wood, and the ambitions of people who had decided to build something permanent in this impermanent land. Shops and saloons, and a church steeple rising against the orange sky. People stared as they rode past. Eleanor was used to being stared at. Her height alone drew attention wherever she went. But this was different. A woman her size, visibly pregnant, riding into town with a man who looked like he had not slept in days. It was a spectacle, a story people would tell over dinner. James ignored the stairs leading them through the main street and out toward the edge of town. Eleanor followed, too exhausted to care what anyone thought of her. They stopped before a neat house with a white picket fence and a shingle that read Dr. Marcus Harrison Medicine and Surgery. James helped Eleanor down from her horse. She could barely stand. 3 days of riding had taken everything she had left. Her legs shook, her back screamed. The baby pressed against her bladder with an urgency that would have been comic under other circumstances. The door opened before they could knock. A man in his 50s stood there, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of face that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He took one look at Eleanor, one long, assessing glance that traveled from her face to her belly to her trembling legs, and his expression shifted from curiosity to professional concern. "You're the woman from the telegram," he said. His voice was calm, measured the voice of someone who had learned to keep his emotions out of his medicine, the one the doctor said couldn't conceive. "That's me." Eleanor's voice came out weaker than she intended. "The medical impossibility." Harrison stepped aside to let them in. "Well," he said, "let's see if we can keep you alive long enough to prove them all wrong." Dr. Harrison's examination room smelled like carbolic acid and old leather. Medical instruments gleamed on a table by the window. Anatomy charts covered the walls. Bodies split open to reveal their secrets, organs labeled in careful Latin script. Eleanor sat on the examination table while the doctor's hands pressed carefully against her belly, feeling the shape of what should not exist. His face gave nothing away. Just professional assessment, clinical observation, the kind of blank expression that terrified her more than concern would have. James stood by the door, his hat crushed between his hands, watching every movement the doctor made. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew would be guilty. "How far along did you say?" Dr. Harrison asked, his fingers tracing the curve of her abdomen. 4 months, maybe closer to 5 now. "And the doctors in Sweden, what specifically did they say about your condition?" Eleanor recited it from memory. She had heard it enough times that the words had worn grooves in her mind. "Narrow pelvic opening, hormonal irregularities, muscular development inconsistent with successful pregnancy, high risk of miscarriage if conception somehow occurred, higher risk of maternal death if pregnancy progressed to term. Dr. Harrison made a humming sound. He continued his examination, listening to her heartbeat, checking her pulse, asking her to breathe deeply while he listened to her lungs with an instrument she did not know the name of. Finally, he stepped back. Get dressed, then we'll talk. Those 4 words dropped like stones into still water. We'll talk. Not everything's fine. Not you'll be okay. Just we'll talk. Eleanor's hands trembled as she buttoned her dress. James moved to help her, and for once she let him too exhausted to refuse. They sat in Dr. Harrison's office, surrounded by books and papers and the accumulated wisdom of a man who had spent his life fighting against death. James held Eleanor's hand. She let him. There seemed no point in maintaining distance now. I'm going to be honest with you, Dr. Harrison said, folding his hands on his desk, because dishonesty helps no one in situations like this. Eleanor felt her breath catch in her throat. Beside her, James's grip tightened. Your doctors in Sweden weren't wrong about the risks. Your pelvic structure is narrower than ideal. That baby is going to have a difficult time making its way into the world. And your musculature, while it gives you strength most women don't have, also means your body might not know how to relax and open the way it needs to during labor. Eleanor forced herself to speak past the fear constricting her throat. So I'm going to die. She said it flatly. Might as well face it head on. Might as well hear the sentence pronounced and be done with the waiting. I didn't say that. Dr. Harrison's eyes were kind but firm. The eyes of a man who had seen too much death to fear speaking its name, but who had also seen too many miracles to give up on anyone who still drew breath. I said there are risks, significant ones. But I've delivered babies in field hospitals during the war with less resources than we have here. I've seen women survive things that should have killed them because they were determined to live, because they refused to give up when their bodies wanted to quit. He leaned forward. The question isn't whether it's possible for you to survive, Mrs. McAllister. The question is whether you're willing to fight for it. Of course she's willing, James said. His voice was rough with desperation. She's the strongest person I've ever met. Physical strength isn't what I'm talking about, my dear. Harrison turned to Eleanor, and she saw something in his gaze that she recognized. Understanding. The understanding of someone who knew what it was like to fight against impossible odds. Mrs. McAllister, the next 4 months are going to be harder than anything you've experienced. Your body is going to fight itself. You're going to be in pain more often than not. You're going to wonder if it's worth it. You're going to have moments when you want to give up. He paused, letting the words settle. And when labor comes, you're going to have to push through fear and pain and the very real possibility of death to bring this child into the world. So I need to know, are you prepared for that? Because if you're not, if you want to try to end this pregnancy now while you still can, I won't judge you. No one would judge you. You didn't choose this situation. Eleanor felt James's hand tighten on hers, felt him wanting to speak, to protest, to insist that she keep fighting. She squeezed back, telling him without words to be quiet. This was her choice, her body, her decision. How do I improve my chances, she asked. Dr. Harrison smiled. It was a small smile, tired around the edges, but genuine. That's the right question. The plan was laid out in clinical detail. First, complete bed rest starting immediately. No more ranch work, no more riding, no more doing anything that required physical exertion. Eleanor's body needed every bit of energy focused on keeping the baby growing and keeping her alive. Second, she needed to stay in Billings for the last month of pregnancy, close to Dr. Harrison, close to medical supplies, close to any chance of survival if things went wrong during delivery. Third, she had to eat, even when she did not want to, even when the nausea made every bite feel like a battle. The baby was taking everything from her. She needed to give herself something to take. Fourth, she had to accept help. From James, from Dr. Harrison, from anyone who offered. Pride, the doctor said firmly, will kill you faster than any medical condition. We can't afford, James started. I didn't ask what you could afford. I told you what's required. Eleanor spoke before James could respond. She could see the desperation in his face, the guilt that drove him to object even when the objection was pointless. We'll find a way. What else do I need to know? Dr. Harrison looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke the words that would haunt her for the next 4 months. Your chances, Mrs. McAllister, are approximately 50-50, maybe 60-40 if we're lucky and nothing unexpected happens. The numbers hit like physical blows. 50-50, a coin flip, her life balanced on chance and luck and the whims of a body that had never worked right. James made a sound like he had been punched in the stomach. 50-50, that means, that means I have a chance. Eleanor heard her own voice calm and steady and wondered where the calm was coming from. Before we came here, I thought I was already dead. I thought this pregnancy was a death sentence, and I was just waiting for the execution. But Dr. Harrison is saying I might survive. Might is more than I had yesterday. Mrs. McAllister is right, Dr. Harrison said. Hope is a medical tool just like any other. Used correctly, it can keep you alive when your body wants to give up. Eleanor held on to those words, tucked them away in a place where she could find them in the dark hours to come. Hope was a tool. She had been building things with inadequate tools her entire life. Dr. Harrison sent them to a boarding house on the other side of town. The same boarding house, it turned out, run by the same woman who had approached Eleanor after church, Margaret O'Brien. Maggie took one look at Eleanor's condition and immediately took charge. Well now, she said in her thick Irish brogue, hands on her hips, red hair escaping from her bun in wild curls. You look like something the cat dragged in, refused to eat, and dragged back out again. Come on then, I've got a room with a good bed and a view of nothing interesting enough to make you want to get up. Eleanor found herself being shepherded into a clean, simple room with white curtains and a quilt on the bed that looked handmade. Maggie fired questions at James while simultaneously fluffing pillows and opening windows. You're the husband, good. You'll be working off part of the bill. I need my roof patched before winter, and the fence around my chicken coop has seen better decades. After that, we'll discuss what else needs doing. I have a ranch, James started, and you have a wife who's trying to do the impossible with a body that doctors say can't do it. Which matters more to you, Mr. McAllister? The cattle or her? It was the first time anyone had asked James that question so directly. Eleanor watched his face as he answered, watched the guilt and determination war with each other behind his eyes. Her, she matters more. Good. Maggie's expression softened by approximately 1 degree. Then you'll stay in town. Your ranch hand can manage for a few months. He's young and capable, yes, and you can ride out to check on things when necessary. But you'll sleep here, where you can be useful instead of just guilty. She turned to Eleanor, and her voice gentled in a way that made Eleanor's eyes sting with unexpected tears. And you, my girl, you'll rest. You'll eat what I put in front of you. You'll let people help you for perhaps the first time in your life, and we'll see about proving those Swedish doctors wrong. The weeks in Billings passed in a strange rhythm of waiting and hoping and fearing. Eleanor lay in bed, her world shrunk to the dimensions of a small room and the view from its window. She watched the town go about its business, people walking and talking and living their lives with no idea that she was fighting for hers just yards away. James came and went. He fixed Maggie's roof. He repaired her fence. Every week he rode back to the ranch to check on Sam and the cattle, returning before nightfall to be at Eleanor's side. He found odd jobs around town to pay for the room and the doctor's visits. Every evening he returned smelling like sawdust or horse sweat or whatever work he had found that day. Every evening he brought her food she could barely stomach and sat with her while she forced it down anyway. Her body changed in ways that terrified her. The baby grew larger than Dr. Harrison expected. Her belly stretched tight as a drum skin pulled thin over the life growing inside her. Her hips ached constantly, a deep bone pain that no position could relieve. Some days the pain was so bad she could not move without crying out. Some nights she lay awake, certain she was dying, certain this was it, certain her body was finally giving up the fight. But morning always came, and she was always still breathing. Dr. Harrison visited twice a week, checking her progress, measuring the baby, listening to 2 heartbeats with his instruments. Hers and the impossibly strong flutter of the child inside her. Each time he looked slightly more surprised that she was still alive. You're tougher than I gave you credit for, he said during one visit. I don't feel tough. I feel like I'm being slowly torn apart from the inside. That's what pregnancy is. His voice was matter of fact, but not unkind. Your body breaking itself open to let something new into the world. It's violent and painful and absolutely miraculous that any of us survive it. The fifth month brought an unexpected visitor. Catherine McAllister appeared at the boarding house door on a Tuesday afternoon. Her silver hair perfectly arranged, her traveling clothes dusty from the long ride from the ranch. Maggie showed her up to Eleanor's room with an expression that suggested she was reserving judgment. "So," Catherine said, settling into the chair beside Eleanor's bed as if she owned it, "you've managed to do what the doctors said was impossible." "It would seem so. And now my son has abandoned his ranch to play nursemaid." Eleanor felt the familiar anger rising in her chest. She had not asked James to stay, had not asked anyone for anything, but she forced herself to remain calm. James's mother was the last complication she needed. "I didn't ask him to stay. He chose to." "No, I don't suppose you did." Catherine was silent for a moment, studying Eleanor with those ice-chip eyes. Then she spoke again, and her voice was different, softer, almost human. "He told me about the arrangement you had. No children, just partnership." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. How terribly familiar. Eleanor frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know exactly what it's like to be told your body is wrong, to have doctors declare you barren, to accept a marriage of convenience because you've been convinced you have nothing else to offer." She met Eleanor's eyes, and for the first time Eleanor saw something other than coldness in that gaze. She saw a recognition, understanding, the shared knowledge of women who had been told the same lies by different doctors in different countries. "I was a mail-order bride too, you know. Came from Sweden, same as you, though it was 40 years ago. My English was worse than yours. My prospects were even worse than that. 3 doctors told me I would never conceive. My husband married me knowing that, accepted it, said he wanted a partner more than he wanted children." Catherine's voice grew distant, lost in memories she clearly did not often visit. "And then I surprised everyone. Got pregnant at 35 when everyone had given up on the possibility. Nearly died having James. The labor lasted 2 days. The doctor told my husband twice to prepare for my death." She looked at Eleanor with something approaching warmth. "But here I am. And here he is, the son I was never supposed to have, making the same mistakes his father made, but trying to fix them in ways his father never did." Eleanor did not know what to say. This was not the woman she had expected, not the cold matriarch who had inspected her like livestock at their first meeting. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" "Because I didn't want to give you false hope, because I survived by luck and stubbornness, not by any skill of the doctors. Because looking at you is like looking at myself 40 years ago, and I don't like being reminded of how scared I was." She reached out and took Eleanor's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "But I thought you should know. You're not the first woman to face this, and you won't be the last. The ones who survive are the ones who refuse to give up." It was not an apology for her earlier coldness. Not quite, but it was something. The 6th month brought terror. Eleanor woke in the middle of the night to a wetness she did not understand at first. Then she lit the lamp and saw the blood soaking through the sheets, dark and spreading, and her heart stopped. "James." Her voice came out as a whisper. He was sleeping in the chair by her bed as he had every night since they arrived in Billings. Maggie had refused to let him share the bed, saying Eleanor needed space to breathe, but he had refused to leave the room entirely. "James, wake up." He was alert instantly, years of ranch work having trained him to come awake at the slightest sound of trouble. He saw the blood and his face went white. He ran for Dr. Harrison while Maggie held Eleanor's hand and told her to breathe. "Just breathe. In and out, in and out. Do not panic. Do not give up." The next hours blurred together in a haze of fear and pain and the metallic smell of blood. Dr. Harrison arrived with his broom and his calm demeanor, but Eleanor saw the worry in his eyes that he could not quite hide. His hands worked carefully, examining her, checking the baby, trying to determine how bad the damage was. "Placental abruption," he said finally. His voice was steady but grave. "Partial. The placenta is beginning to separate from your uterine wall." "What does that mean?" James demanded. His voice shook. "It means if the separation becomes complete, we lose the baby. Possibly Eleanor as well." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Can you stop it?" Eleanor asked. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, as if it belonged to someone else. Can you do anything? I can try, but you need to understand, Mrs. McAllister. The next few hours are critical. If the bleeding doesn't stop on its own, there's very little I can do except try to keep you comfortable. Keep her comfortable. The phrase doctors used when they had given up hope. The phrase that meant they were preparing for the end. What followed was the longest night of Eleanor's life. She lay perfectly still, barely breathing, as if any movement might complete what her body had started. James sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering things she could barely hear. Prayers or promises, or apologies, she could not tell which. Maybe all three. Maggie kept vigil in the corner, her rosary beads clicking softly as she prayed to saints Eleanor did not know the names of. And Dr. Harrison watched, waited, checked her pulse every few minutes, measured the bleeding, calculated odds that grew worse with every passing hour. Somewhere in the darkness, Eleanor felt the baby move. A kick, weak but present. Life insisting on itself even as death circled closer. Still fighting, she whispered. What? James leaned closer. The baby. Still fighting. By morning, the bleeding had stopped. Dr. Harrison called it a miracle. The placenta had reattached enough to maintain the pregnancy. The baby's heartbeat was still strong. Eleanor was still alive. But, he said, and the word fell like a stone, you will need even stricter bed rest for the remaining months. Complete rest, no sitting up except to eat, no walking except to the chamber pot. Your body is holding on by a thread, Mrs. McAllister, and that thread is the only thing keeping both of you alive. Eleanor nodded. She would do whatever it took. She would lie in this bed for the next 3 months if that was what survival required. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Still fighting. A week after the bleeding crisis, James received a visitor he did not expect. Eleanor was dozing when she heard voices in the hallway. James's voice sharp with anger, and another voice smooth and cold. Familiar. Reverend Thomas Whitmore. James came back into the room with a face like thunder. In his hands, he held a bundle of letters tied with string. What happened? Eleanor asked. The Reverend came to gloat. James's voice was tight with fury. To tell me that God's justice was being served. That you were being punished for taking Sarah's place. Eleanor felt cold. What did he want? He wanted to tell me that he's been intercepting your letters, the ones you've been sending to California, to your brother. The world tilted. Eleanor felt as if she were falling, even lying flat on her back. Eric, he's been intercepting my letters to Eric. And Eric's replies to you. James handed her the bundle. There are 6 of them here. 6 letters that never reached you. Your brother has been writing to you for months, Eleanor. He's been worried sick. He thought you had abandoned him. Eleanor's hands shook as she untied the string. The first letter was dated 3 months ago. Dearest Eleanor, I received your letter about the ranch and the marriage. I am so happy you have found somewhere to belong. I have been saving money and hope to visit you soon. Please write back and tell me you are well. The second letter 2 months ago. Eleanor. I have not heard from you. I am worried. Please send word that you are alive. I cannot bear the thought of losing you too. The third, the fourth, each one more desperate than the last. Each one arriving at the post office intercepted by the Reverend, held hostage by a man whose sister had died and who needed someone to blame. The 6th letter dated just 2 weeks ago. I do not know if you will ever read this. I do not know if you are alive, but I have to try. I am coming to Montana. I will find you no matter what. You are my sister. You are all I have left. Eleanor read the words through tears that blurred the ink. Eric was alive. Eric had not abandoned her. Eric had been writing to her all along, and a cruel man had stolen those letters out of spite and malice. Why? She whispered. Why would he do this? Because he blames me for Sarah's death, James said. His voice was heavy with the weight of old guilt. And he can't hurt me directly, so he hurts you instead. He said you don't deserve happiness, that you're just a replacement for Sarah, that if God is just, you won't survive to have anything that should have been hers. Eleanor thought of the Reverend's cold eyes at her wedding, the pointed sermon about we's knowing their place, the way he had watched her all those months waiting for her to fail. He's a monster. Yes, James's jaw was tight, and I hit him, knocked him down right there in Maggie's parlor, told him if he ever came near you again, I'd do worse. He sat down on the edge of her bed and took her hand. I'm writing to Eric today, telling him everything. Where you are, what's happening. Maybe he can come before the baby arrives. Eleanor held the letters to her chest, feeling the weight of words she should have received months ago. Eric was coming. Her brother was coming. She was not as alone as she had thought. The final month arrived with the weight of inevitability. Eleanor lay in bed, feeling the baby grow larger and larger inside her. Every breath was a struggle against the pressure on her lungs. Every movement brought pain. Her body had become a battlefield, and she was not sure which side was winning. Dr. Harrison visited every other day now. His examinations were thorough but gentle. He did not hide the truth from her. The baby is large, larger than I'd hoped. Your body is going to have a very hard time bringing this child into the world. But it's possible, Eleanor said. You said hope was a medical tool. It is. So is honesty. He sighed. I want you to prepare for the possibility that I might have to make a choice during delivery. The baby's life or yours. The room went silent. If it comes to that, James said slowly, you save Eleanor. No. Eleanor's voice was stronger than it had been in weeks, the voice of a woman who had made her decision and would not be moved. If it comes to that, you save the baby. Eleanor, this child exists because of an impossible chance. Because my body did something it was never supposed to be able to do. I've spent my whole life being told I was wrong, that I couldn't do what women are supposed to do, that my body was broken and useless. She placed her hand on her swollen belly, feeling the life it shed in her kick in response. But I did the impossible, James. I created life despite everything. And if I die giving this baby its chance to live, that's a trade I'm willing to make. James looked at her with something between despair and admiration. And if I'm not willing to make that trade, if I can't bear to lose you the way I lost Sarah, then you'll live with the same guilt you've been carrying for 5 years. Only this time you'll know you made the wrong choice twice. It was brutal. It was true. And James had no response to it. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. Let's hope it doesn't come to that choice. In my experience, women who are determined to live have a way of making their own odds. The labor started on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Eleanor woke to pain that stole her breath. A contraction so powerful it arched her back off the bed, tore a scream from her throat before she could stop it. She felt liquid warmth between her legs and knew immediately what was happening. James. Her voice came out calm despite the terror coursing through every nerve. Get Dr. Harrison, now. She watched him run out of the room, heard his footsteps pounding down the stairs, heard the front door crash open. And then she was alone with the pain. Alone with the impossible child fighting to be born. Alone with the 50-50 odds that had hung over her for months like a sword waiting to fall. She placed her hands on her belly and spoke to the life inside her. All right, little one, it's time. Let's see what we're both made of. The baby kicked in response. One last kick. One last moment of dreaming. And then the hardest fight of Eleanor's life began. The next 12 hours would test everything Eleanor had ever believed about herself. Dr. Harrison arrived within minutes, bag in hand, his face set in the calm concentration of a man who had seen worse and hoped to see better. Behind him came Maggie, arms full of clean cloths and hot water, her Irish prayers already muttering beneath her breath. The contractions came fast and hard, too fast, too hard. Each one tore through Eleanor's body like lightning, leaving her gasping, clawing at the sheets, fighting for air that seemed to have abandoned the room entirely. The baby is eager, Dr. Harrison said, his hands working quickly to examine her. But your body is fighting it. The muscles aren't relaxing the way they need to. What does that mean? James stood at the foot of the bed, his face white as bone. What can we do? We wait, we help where we can, and we hope. Hope. That word again. That fragile, terrible word that had become Eleanor's constant companion through months of fear and uncertainty. She grabbed James's hand as another contraction seized her, squeezed until she felt his bones shift beneath her grip. He did not pull away, did not flinch, just held on and let her take whatever strength she needed. The first hour passed in a blur of pain and sweat and the copper taste of bitten lips. Eleanor had known it would be difficult. The doctors had told her so. Her body was not designed for this, they had said. Her hips were too narrow, her muscles too strong, her entire system working against the natural process of birth. But knowing something would be difficult and experiencing that difficulty were two entirely different things. Each contraction felt like being torn apart from the inside, like her body was trying to split itself in half, like the baby was fighting its way out through walls that refused to yield. "Breathe," Dr. Harrison said. His voice was calm, steady, and anchor in the storm of agony. "Don't fight the contractions. Work with them. Your body knows what to do." But her body did not know. Her body had never known how to do the things women's bodies were supposed to do. Her body had always been wrong, broken, insufficient. "I can't," she gasped. "It's too much." "You can," James's voice close to her ear. "You've survived everything else the world has thrown at you. You can survive this." The third hour brought Maggie's fierce presence to Eleanor's bedside. The Irish woman had seen births before, had helped bring countless children into the world in the old country and the new. She knew what to do when doctors' calm words were not enough. "Listen to me, girl." Maggie gripped Eleanor's face between her rough, warm hands. "My cousin Siobhan, God rest her soul, and she labored for 3 days with her first. 3 days of hell on earth. And you know what she said afterwards? She said it was worth it. Every moment of pain was worth it for the child she held in her arms." "I don't know if I can last 3 days," Eleanor managed. "You won't need to. This baby is coming faster than that. But you need to stop fighting your own body. You need to trust that you were made for this, even if every doctor in Sweden told you otherwise." "They were right. My body isn't—" "Your body created a child that shouldn't exist." Maggie's voice was fierce, unyielding. "Your body did the impossible, and now your body will finish what it started, but only if you let it." The fifth hour brought a shift. Dr. Harrison's hands worked carefully, his face intent with concentration. Eleanor could not see what he was doing, but she could feel it. Pressure, movement, something changing deep inside her. "The baby is turning," he said, and there was cautious hope in his voice. "Your body is finally starting to cooperate." Starting to cooperate. Eleanor laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "My body, the one everyone said was wrong, finally cooperating." "Wrong is a matter of perspective, Mrs. McAllister. From where I'm standing, your body is doing exactly what it needs to do. It's just doing it in its own time, in its own way." Another contraction hit and Eleanor screamed. The sound tore from her throat without permission, raw and animal, and full of everything she had been holding back for months, years. A lifetime of being told she was too much and not enough, all coming out in one endless howl of pain and defiance. "That's it," Dr. Harrison said. "That's exactly right. Don't hold back. Let it out." The seventh hour tested the limits of human endurance. Eleanor had lost track of time, lost track of everything except the rhythm of contractions and the brief, precious moments of rest between them. Her world had shrunk to this room, this bed, this battle between her body and the life fighting to escape it. James had not left her side. His hand was in hers, had been in hers for hours, and she had squeezed it so hard so many times that his fingers must be broken by now. But he never complained, never pulled away, just stayed steady and present exactly as he had promised. "I'm sorry," he whispered during a moment of relative calm. "I'm so sorry. You're doing so well. You're so strong. I don't deserve to be here watching you fight this hard for something I caused." "Stop apologizing." Her voice was hoarse from screaming. "I need you to stop feeling guilty and start being useful." "What can I do? Tell me about the ranch. Tell me what it looks like in spring. Tell me what it smells like after rain. Give me something to hold on to besides the pain." So he did. He talked about the way the grass turned green in April, spreading across the hills like a promise. He talked about the creek that ran through the north pasture, how it swelled with snowmelt and sang over the rocks. He talked about the calves that would be born soon, wobbly-legged and wide-eyed, taking their first steps on land that had belonged to his family for 3 generations. He talked about building a swing under the big oak tree, about teaching their child to ride, about Sunday dinners with Maggie visiting from town, and maybe even his mother softening around the edges. He painted a picture of a future, and Eleanor held on to it with everything she had. The ninth hour brought the first real sign of progress. "I can see the head," Dr. Harrison said. His voice was tense with concentration. but tinged with something that might have been excitement. "You're almost there, Mrs. McAllister. One more push and we might be done. One more push." Such a simple phrase. Such an impossible demand. Eleanor did not think she had one more push left in her. Did not think she had anything left at all. Her body had been wrung dry of strength of will, of everything that made it function. She was empty, hollow, a shell that had given everything and had nothing more to give. But then she felt James's hand in hers, felt Maggie's grip on her shoulder, heard Catherine's voice from somewhere in the room, Catherine who had arrived at some point Eleanor did not remember telling her. She could do this. She had survived this herself. Eleanor was stronger than she knew, and somewhere from a place she had not known existed. Eleanor found one more push. The baby came into this world screaming, loud, furious, alive. "It's a girl," Dr. Harrison said, holding up a tiny red-faced creature covered in blood and vernix and all the evidence of the journey she had just completed. A perfectly healthy baby girl. Eleanor collapsed back against the pillows. She wanted to hold her daughter, wanted to see her face, wanted to count her fingers and toes and verify that she was real, that this impossible thing had actually happened. But her arms would not move. Her vision was blurring at the edges. Everything felt distant, muted, as if the world was slowly sliding away from her. She was aware of blood, too much blood, leaving her body in a warm rush that should have frightened her but somehow did not. She was aware of Dr. Harrison's voice getting urgent, sharp commands she could not quite understand. She was aware of James shouting her name, over and over, "Eleanor, Eleanor, Eleanor," and then she was aware of nothing at all. The silence that followed was the loudest thing James McAllister had ever heard. He watched Eleanor's chest stop moving, watched her eyes flutter closed, watched the color drain from her face until she was pale as the sheet she lay upon. Dr. Harrison was working frantically, hands pressing on her belly, shouting orders to Maggie, who ran for supplies. His calm had shattered. His professionalism had crumbled. He was a man fighting a battle he knew he might not win. Catherine had taken the baby to the corner of the room, shielding the screaming infant from the horror unfolding around her. The child wailed, demanding attention, demanding life, unaware that the woman who had given her existence was slipping away. "No," James's voice came out as a whisper, then louder. "No, no, you can't, Eleanor, Eleanor." He fell to his knees beside the bed, grabbed her hand. It was cold, already cold, like Sarah's hand had been cold when he finally came home from the cattle drive. Like death had already claimed her and was just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. "Don't do this," the words tore out of him. "Don't leave me. You can't do this. I can't lose you too. Not like this. Not because of me. Please, please, Eleanor, wake up. Fight. You have to fight." He thought of Sarah, thought of finding her exactly like this, pale and still, and gone forever. Thought of the grave on the hill where he had buried his wife and son and all his hope for the future. He thought, this is my punishment. This is what I deserve. God has finally given me what I earned. I lose everyone I love because I'm too selfish to protect them. "Come on," Dr. Harrison was muttering, his hands working desperately. "Come on, damn you, fight. You didn't come this far to give up now." Maggie was praying, loud, fierce Irish prayers to saints and angels and anyone else who might be listening. Her rosary beads clicked like a death rattle, counting down the seconds Eleanor had left. "Save her," James begged. He did not know who he was begging. The doctor, God, Eleanor herself. "Please, I'll do anything. Give anything. Just save her." Eleanor was floating. It was peaceful here. Wherever here was. No pain, no fear, no body that was too big, too wrong, too broken for the things it was supposed to do. Just silence and warmth and the absence of everything that had ever hurt her. She could stay here forever. Could sink into this darkness and let it carry her away to wherever souls went when their bodies gave up. She had fought so hard for so long. Surely she had earned this rest. But then she heard something. A sound from very far away, faint at first, then growing stronger. A baby crying. Her baby. Her impossible baby. The child who should not exist, born from a body that everyone said could not create her. Eleanor thought about her daughter alone in the world, growing up without a mother the way Eleanor had grown up. missing something fundamental the way Eleanor had always missed something she could not name. She thought about James burying another wife on the hill behind the ranch house, carrying guilt for two women's deaths instead of one, breaking apart under the weight of what he had done. She thought about Eric coming all this way to find her arriving too late standing at a graveside instead of an embrace. She thought about the baby screaming somewhere in the distance, demanding the mother she would never know. No, the word rose up from somewhere deep inside Eleanor, from the same place that had found one more push when she had nothing left, from the reserve of strength she had not known existed until she needed it. No, I will not leave her. I will not leave any of them. And then she fought. She fought through the darkness, clawed her way back toward the crying, refused to let go of a life she had almost given up on before it really started. The darkness pushed back, tried to drag her down into its peaceful depths. But Eleanor had spent her whole life fighting against forces that wanted to define her, diminish her, destroy her. She knew how to fight. It was the only thing she had ever truly known how to do. She reached for the sound of her daughter's voice, and she pulled herself back into the world. Eleanor gasped. Her chest heaved, her eyes flew open, her lungs screamed for air, and she gave them all they wanted, huge gulping breaths that burned like fire and tasted like life. Dr. Harrison staggered back, his face ashen with shock. "She's back." His voice was barely a whisper. "My God, she came back." James could not speak, could not move, could only stare at Eleanor's face as color flooded back into her cheeks, as her eyes found his, as her lips moved to form words he could not quite hear. "The baby." Her voice was a rasp, barely audible. "Is she alive? Is my daughter alive?" "She's perfect." James's voice broke on the words. Tears streamed down his face without shame. "She's perfect and healthy and screaming her lungs out, and you're alive. You're alive. I don't understand how, but you're alive." He buried his face in her shoulder and sobbed, great racking sobs that shook his entire body. All the fear and guilt and grief he had been carrying for 5 years, for 5 months, for the past 12 hours, all of it came pouring out at once. Eleanor's hand found his hair. Weak as she was barely conscious, she stroked his head the way she would soon stroke their daughters. "I came back," she whispered. "I told you I would fight. I came back." It was hours before Eleanor was strong enough to hold her daughter. Dr. Harrison had worked through the night, stopping the bleeding, stitching the damage, doing everything medical science knew how to do. He was honest with them about the close call. "You died on that table, Mrs. McAllister. Your heart stopped. I don't know how long. Long enough that I was certain we had lost you." He shook his head slowly. "In 30 years of medicine, I have never seen anyone come back from that. I don't have an explanation. I'm not sure there is one." "Maybe some things don't need explaining," Eleanor said. "Maybe some things just are." Maybe. He did not look convinced, but he also did not look unhappy to be wrong. Catherine placed the baby in Eleanor's arms, so small, so impossibly small, and yet so perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair that stood up in wild directions, and blue eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing all at once. "She has your eyes," James said softly. He sat on the edge of the bed, close enough to touch but not quite touching, as if he was afraid she might shatter if he held her too tightly. "She has your stubbornness," Eleanor replied, insisting on existing when she shouldn't, fighting her way into the world against every obstacle. The baby yawned, stretched her tiny limbs, and then wrapped one impossibly small hand around Eleanor's finger and held on with surprising strength. "She's strong," Maggie said from the doorway, "like her mother." "What do we call her?" James asked. Eleanor looked at her daughter, thought about everything that had led to this moment. The doctors who said her body was wrong. The men who had looked at her with disgust. Lars at the altar calling her more ox than woman. The years of believing she had nothing to offer the world. And then she thought about James's steady presence through her rage. Dr. Harrison's determined hope. Maggie's fierce care. Catherine's unexpected solidarity. The baby fighting to be born despite every obstacle. Herself clawing her way back from death because she refused to leave her daughter alone. "Hope," she said. "We call her Hope. Hope McAllister." James tried the name on his tongue. "Why Hope?" "Because that's what she is. She's hope that bodies can do impossible things. Hope that people can change. Hope that mistakes can lead to miracles. Hope that tomorrow can be better than today. She looked at James, met his eyes, and saw her own exhaustion and wonder reflected there. We all need something to believe in. I believe in her. The days that followed passed in a haze of recovery and wonder. Eleanor's body healed slowly, stubbornly, in the same way it had done everything else. Dr. Harrison visited daily, checking her progress, marveling at her survival. In all my years of practice, he told her during one visit, I have never seen anything quite like what happened in that room. You should not be alive, Mrs. McAllister. By every medical understanding I possess, you should have died. Then maybe medical understanding needs to expand, Eleanor said. Maybe bodies can do more than doctors give them credit for. Maybe they can. He smiled, and it softened the tired lines of his face. You've certainly given me something to think about. Maggie became a permanent fixture at the boarding house, helping with the baby cooking meals that Eleanor actually wanted to eat, telling stories about Ireland that made the long recovery hours pass more quickly. You're not getting rid of me now, she declared when Eleanor tried to thank her. That baby is going to need a godmother, and I've appointed myself to the position. Besides, someone needs to make sure you actually rest instead of trying to climb out of bed and do everything yourself. I'm not that bad. You tried to get up and change your own bandages this morning while holding the baby with one arm. I could have managed. You would have torn your stitches and bled all over my good floors. Lie down and let people help you, you stubborn Swedish mule. Catherine surprised everyone by staying in Billings for the duration of Eleanor's recovery. She was still not warm exactly. Warmth did not seem to be in her nature, but she was competent and surprisingly gentle, with Hope handling the baby with an expertise that spoke of her own experience as a mother. She reminds me of James when he was born, Catherine admitted one quiet afternoon. The same determination, the same refusal to give up, the same ability to make everyone around her fall in love against their better judgment. You love her already, Eleanor said. I do. Catherine looked almost surprised by her own admission. I did not expect to. I came here prepared to watch you fail, prepared to be proven right about mail-order brides and impossible pregnancies, and all the other things I told myself to justify my coldness. She looked at Eleanor with something approaching respect. I was wrong about you, about this situation, about what strength looks like. I hope you can forgive me for taking so long to see it. It was the closest Catherine McAllister would ever come to an apology. Eleanor accepted it as such. 3 weeks after Hope's birth, a stranger appeared at the boarding house door. Eleanor was sitting up in bed, Hope asleep in her arms, when she heard the commotion downstairs. Voices Maggie's Irish brogue raised in surprise. Footsteps on the stairs, too quick, too eager. And then a face appeared in the doorway. A face she had not seen in 3 years, but would have recognized anywhere. Tall, fair-haired, blue eyes wide with disbelief and joy. Eleanor? The word came out choked, broken. The voice of a man who had traveled across a country to find his sister and could not quite believe he had succeeded. Eric. Her own voice cracked on his name. Eric. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and fell to his knees beside her, bed tears streaming down his face. He looked older than she remembered. The years and the work and the worry had carved new lines around his eyes. But he was still her brother, still the boy she had raised after their mother died, still the only family she had left in the world. I thought you were dead, he said. His voice shook. I wrote and you never answered. I thought something terrible had happened. I thought I had lost you. I never got your letters. Eleanor reached for him with her free hand, the other still cradling Hope. The minister in town, he was intercepting them, stealing them. James found out and got them back, but by then months had passed, and I thought you had forgotten me. Forgotten you, Eric laughed through his tears. You raised me, Eleanor. You gave up everything for me. How could I ever forget you? He looked at the baby in her arms, and his expression softened into wonder. This is Hope, your niece. Eleanor shifted the sleeping infant so Eric could see her face. Hope, this is your Uncle Eric. He came all the way from California to meet you. Eric reached out one tentative finger and touched Hope's tiny hand. The baby stirred, yawned, and wrapped her fingers around his without waking. "She's beautiful," he said. "She looks like you." "God help her then." But Eleanor was smiling, really smiling for perhaps the first time since this entire ordeal began. "She'll be too tall and too stubborn, and everyone will tell her she's too much. And she'll prove them all wrong, just like her mother." James appeared in the doorway, watching the reunion with an expression Eleanor could not quite read. Guilt, maybe, or gratitude, or simply the wonder of watching a family come back together. "You must be Eric," he said. "I'm James, Eleanor's husband." Eric stood and faced him. For a long moment, the two men simply looked at each other. Eleanor held her breath, unsure what to expect. Eric knew about the pregnancy, knew how it had happened, knew the risk James had taken with his sister's life. But Eric did not throw a punch, did not shout accusations. Instead, he extended his hand. "Thank you for writing to me," he said. "Thank you for telling me where she was. Thank you for staying with her through all of this." James took his hand. "I caused all of this. Staying was the least I could do." Maybe, but a lot of men would have run, would have told themselves it wasn't their responsibility and found somewhere else to be. Eric's grip tightened. "You didn't run? That counts for something." "Not enough, but I'm trying to make it count for more." Eric nodded slowly. Then he turned back to Eleanor and the smile returned to his face. "So, tell me everything. Tell me about Montana. Tell me about this ranch I've been hearing about. Tell me about this baby and how you managed to do the impossible when every doctor in Sweden said you couldn't." "That's a long story." "I have time." He pulled up a chair and sat down beside her bed. "I came all this way. The least you can do is tell me how you ended up here." So Eleanor told him everything. From the advertisement in the Stockholm newspaper to the confrontation in the Montana dust, to the 12 hours of labor and the moment when she died and came back because she refused to leave her daughter alone in the world. Eric listened without interrupting. When she finished, his eyes were wet again. "You always were the strong one," he said, "even when we were children. Even when father was drinking himself to death and mother was in the ground and everything was falling apart. You held us together. You kept us alive. I didn't have a choice. You did. You could have given up, could have let the farm fail and gone your separate way. But you didn't. You chose to be strong even when it cost you everything." He reached out and took her hand. "I'm sorry I left. Sorry I went to America without you. Sorry I wasn't here when you needed me. You're here now, that's what matters." "Yes," Eric smiled. "I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again. Not unless you come with me." One final piece of business remained before Eleanor could truly begin her new life. Reverend Thomas Whitmore, the man who had intercepted her letters, who had tried to isolate her from the only family she had left, who had gloated about her suffering and predicted her death with something approaching eagerness. James confronted him in his own church in front of his own congregation on a Sunday morning when everyone in town was gathered to hear the word of God. He walked down the center aisle with the bundle of stolen letters in his hand, his boots loud on the wooden floor, his face set in an expression that made people move out of his way. "Reverend Whitmore," his voice carried to every corner of the building, "I have something that belongs to my wife, something you took from her." The Reverend stood at his pulpit, his face going pale. "Mr. McAllister, this is highly inappropriate. We are in the middle of a service. Then your congregation can hear what kind of man has been leading them in prayer." James held up the letters for everyone to see. "These are letters from my wife's brother, 6 of them written over the course of 4 months. Letters expressing love and concern and desperate fear for his sister's well-being. Letters that never reached her because this man," he pointed at the Reverend, "intercepted them, stole them, kept them hidden while my wife believed she had been abandoned by the only family she had left." The congregation murmured. Heads turned. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. "He also intercepted my wife's letters to her brother, prevented her from communicating with the outside world, tried to isolate her to make her believe she was alone because he blames me for his sister's death and couldn't find a way to hurt me directly." "That's not true, Bastejo." The Reverend's voice was shaking now. "I was protecting Sarah's memory. I was ensuring that her replacement knew her place. Her replacement James's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. My wife is not a replacement for anyone. She is her own person with her own value, and you tried to destroy her because of something I did 5 years ago. He turned to face the congregation. I'm not asking you to forgive me for what happened to Sarah. I'll never forgive myself. I should have stayed. I should have listened to her fears. I should have been there when she needed me, and I wasn't, and she died because of my choices. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. But this man, this so-called shepherd, he used his position to torment an innocent woman. He took pleasure in her suffering. He told me to my face that if God was just, she would die in childbirth, and I would bury her next to Sarah. Gasps rippled through the pews. The Reverend's face had gone from pale to gray. That's not justice, James continued. That's cruelty. And it's time this town knew the difference. He dropped the letters on the altar and turned to walk out. Behind him, the congregation erupted into chaos. The Reverend was asked to leave his position within the week. The story of what he had done spread through town like wildfire. The stolen letters, the intercepted correspondence, the gleeful prediction of Eleanor's death. People who had sat in his pews for years looked at him differently now, saw the coldness they had once mistaken for righteousness, saw the cruelty they had once called conviction. He left Billings on a Tuesday morning, bitter and broken-headed, for a church somewhere back east that did not know his history. Maybe he would find redemption there. Maybe he would carry his darkness to a new congregation and continue his slow poison. Eleanor did not particularly care either way. She was too busy living to waste energy on revenge. 4 weeks after Hope's birth, Eleanor was finally strong enough to travel. They took it slow this time. A wagon instead of horses, frequent stops, plenty of help. Eric rode alongside them, having decided to stay in Montana for a while, to help with the ranch, to be close to the sister he had almost lost and the niece he had only just met. Maggie promised to visit, extracting solemn oaths from Eleanor that she would rest properly and not try to run the entire ranch single-handedly within a month of arriving. I know your type, Maggie said as they prepared to leave. Give you an inch of strength and you'll take a mile of work. James, you're responsible for making sure she actually recovers. Sit on her if you have to. I'll do my best. Your best had better be good enough or I'll come out there and do it myself. The journey back to the ranch took 3 days. 3 days of gentle travel, of watching the Montana landscape roll past, of Hope, sleeping peacefully in Eleanor's arms while the adults talked about futures and possibilities and all the things that lay ahead. The ranch came into view on a golden afternoon, the light turning the brown hills amber and the white ranch house warm with color. Small, struggling, home. Are you ready? James asked as they approached. Eleanor looked at the place where she had arrived as a stranger, where she had become a partner, where she had been betrayed and broken and rebuilt herself from the ruins, where she had discovered that her body could do impossible things if she refused to let anyone tell her otherwise. Yes, she said, I'm ready. Hey. Sam, the young ranch hand, came running out to meet them. He had been managing alone for months, and the relief on his face was almost comical. Mrs. McAllister. He swept off his hat as he approached the wagon. I'm real glad to see you. Real glad you made it through. The whole towns have been talking about it. They say you died and came back to life. Something like that. Is that the baby? He peered at the bundle in her arms with the wonder of someone who had never been so close to something so new. She's tiny. She's perfect, Eleanor said. Her name is Hope. Hope. Sam tried the name out. That's a good name, strong. She comes by it honestly. That night, Eleanor stood on the porch of the ranch house, Hope sleeping against her chest. The Montana sky stretched infinite above her, stars scattered like promises across the darkness. The same sky she had stared at on her first night here, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. The same sky she had cursed during the worst of her fear, demanding answers from a universe that offered only silence. It looked different now. Not indifferent, but patient. As if it had been waiting for her to understand something that could only be learned through suffering and survival. James came to stand beside her. He did not speak at first. They had said so much over the past months. Accusations and apologies, fears and hopes, rage and forgiveness. Sometimes silence was enough. The night air was cool but not cold. Spring was coming. New life was returning to the land. Soon the hills would be green and the creek would sing with snowmelt, and everything that had seemed dead would prove itself to be only sleeping. Do you still hate me? James's voice broke the silence. The question he had asked once before on a night that felt like a lifetime ago. Eleanor considered it seriously the way she considered everything. No, she said finally. I'm not sure I ever really did. I was angry, furious, and I had every right to be. But hate, she shook her head slowly. Hate requires believing someone is irredeemable. Believing they can never change, never grow, never become anything other than what they were in their worst moment. And I watched you change, James. I watched you stay when you could have run. Watched you work yourself to exhaustion to pay for my care. Watched you hold my hand through 12 hours of labor and never once look away. She turned to face him, and the starlight caught the tears forming in her eyes. You made a terrible choice, the worst choice of your life, and then you spent months trying to make it right. You can't undo what you did, but you can choose what you do next. That's what you told me once. I remember. You kept your word. When I needed you most, you were there. When it would have been easier to run to blame the doctors, to tell yourself it wasn't your fault, you stayed. You owned what you did, and you let me be angry without trying to make me feel guilty for my anger. She reached out and took his hand. That matters, James. It doesn't erase the past. Nothing erases the past, but it builds the future. And I want to build a future with you. A real one this time. Not just a business arrangement. Not just partners who share a house and a ranch and nothing else. So, what do you want? I want what we almost had before everything went wrong. Respect, trust, companionship. And maybe if we work at it long enough, something more than that. James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I love you. The words hung in the night air between them, fragile and brave. I don't know when it happened, he continued. Maybe it was always there underneath the guilt and the fear and the grief I was carrying for Sarah. But I love you, Eleanor McAllister. Not because you gave me a daughter, not because you survived what I put you through, because of who you are, because of the strength and the stubbornness and the way you refuse to let anyone tell you what you're worth. He squeezed her hand. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you, trying to prove that I can be the man you deserve. Not because I think I'll ever make up for what I did, but because you deserve someone who's trying, someone who wakes up every day and chooses to be better than they were the day before. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Love was a word she had learned not to trust. It had been used against her too many times, by men who did not mean it, by a world that told her she was not worth loving. But standing here with her impossible daughter in her arms and her imperfect husband beside her, she found that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to trust it again. I love you too, she said, and I forgive you. The words were simple, 3 syllables each, but they changed everything. Hope stirred in her arms, made a small sound of contentment, and settled back to sleep, unaware of the history being made around her, unaware that her parents had just crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed. James pulled Eleanor close, careful not to disturb the baby. They stood together on the porch, 2 broken people who had found a way to put each other back together. What happens now? He asked. Now we live. Now we raise our daughter. Now we run this ranch and build something that lasts. She smiled against his shoulder. Now we prove all those doctors wrong every single day just by existing. That sounds like a good plan. It's the only plan I've got. Eleanor woke before dawn the next morning. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the sounds of the ranch coming to life. Roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, James's voice outside talking to Sam about the day's work. Hope slept in the cradle beside the bed, the cradle that James had built during the long months of waiting. Her tiny chest rose and fell with each breath. Her small fists curled beside her face. Perfect. Alive. Real. Eleanor rose quietly, not wanting to wake her. She walked to the window and looked out at the land that had become her home. The hills were starting to green. The creek glittered in the early light. The sky was turning from gray to pink to gold, the same transformation it had made every morning for thousands of years before her and would make for thousands of years after. She thought about the girl she had been, the girl who stood at a Swedish altar while a man told her she was more ox than woman, The girl who believed every doctor who said her body was wrong. The girl who crossed an ocean looking for a place where she might be worth something. That girl was gone now. In her place stood a woman who had done the impossible, who had created life against every prediction, who had died and come back because she refused to leave her daughter alone, who had learned that strength was not just about endurance, but about letting people help you when you could not help yourself. My body's too big, she whispered to the Montana morning. I'm not breeding material. She smiled. I guess the doctors were wrong about everything. Behind her, Hope began to cry, the sharp, demanding cry of a baby who was hungry and did not intend to wait patiently for her breakfast. Eleanor turned from the window and went to her daughter, lifted her from the cradle, held her close. I know, she murmured. I know you're hungry. I know the world is loud and strange and nothing makes sense yet, but I'm here. I'll always be here. And someday when you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you a story. She sat down in the rocking chair by the window, Hope cradled against her chest. I'll tell you about a woman who was told her whole life that she was wrong. Too big, too strong, too much. A woman who believed it for a long time because when everyone tells you the same thing over and over, you start to think it must be true. Hope's crying quieted as she began to nurse. Her eyes, the same blue as Eleanor's, gazed up at her mother with the unfocused intensity of new life. But then that woman did something impossible. She created you, against every prediction, against every doctor's opinion, against everything that said she couldn't. Eleanor bent and kissed her daughter's forehead. And you know what that taught her? It taught her that maybe she was never wrong in the first place. Maybe the world was wrong about her. Maybe bodies can do more than anyone gives them credit for. Maybe the impossible is just something that hasn't happened yet. The sun rose fully over the Montana hills, flooding the room with golden light. A new day, a new beginning, a new chapter in a story that had almost ended too soon. You're going to be something special. Hope McAllister. I can feel it. You're going to do impossible things just like your mother. You're going to prove everyone wrong who ever tries to tell you who you are or what you can be. Eleanor looked out the window at the land that had tested her, broken her, and ultimately given her a reason to fight harder than she had ever fought before. And I'm going to be here to watch you do it. Every step of the way, I'm going to be here. She rocked gently, her daughter in her arms, her future spreading out before her like the endless Montana sky. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Lindgren McAllister felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, exactly who she was supposed to be, finally, impossibly, perfectly home.